Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, today we are going to cover a friend of the channel, Mr. Beat. In my recommendations, I saw this video and I definitely thought I wanted to check it out because it's a question as a teacher I get a lot in comparing these three guys because the video is titled, Who Killed More, Mao, Stalin, or Hitler? People love to throw up numbers of people that died, but there's so many different loose definitions of what type of deaths under the, I guess, rule of these three different dictators can actually be attributed to them directly, or is it indirectly with policies? Those numbers are obviously going to differ depending on how you're going to define this. But let's see what Mr. Beat's got here. All right, the original video is down below. Make sure you're supporting Mr. Beat. He's been a great friend and ally of the channel, so make sure you're supporting over there. All right, let's get started.
Two things before we get started.
Yeah?
First, this video is sponsored in part by Morning Brew. Second, this video is also part of a collaboration called Project Dictator.
What's that?
You really ought to check out all the videos for it in the playlist in the description of this video. But first, watch this video. Okay. Are you watching? Listening's
Yes.
fine too.
There's a dictator
and
playlist.
a word of warning, this video is about killing. I'm Mr. Beat.
This will be demonetized?
Let the record stand that I have never killed anyone. Not even once.
Well done. Well done, Mr.
You do
Beat.
believe me, don't you?
Yeah, I believe you.
Anyway,
I believe you. For
I
Kansas.
think killing is wrong. I even wrote a song called Killing is Wrong.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's it.
He makes music. He has a music channel. Check it out.
Yeah, I dance to my own songs. Most of us couldn't even imagine ourselves ever killing another human being, also known as homicide. We tend to view killers as bad. No, not the band The Killers. They're great. We view people who kill others
Those are
as
all
bad.
right.
And yet, people justify killing all the time. In fact, capital punishment, or the government killing someone as punishment for a crime, is legal in dozens of countries around the world. Killing is only called murder when it's illegal, and murder is illegal pretty much everywhere. In fact, if you murder someone, you can be killed for it as punishment.
Yeah. Of course.
Wait a second. But it's not always so simple. We often kill in order to save lives. There's killing as self-defense. There's a term called, quote, manslaughter, which means killing someone without meaning to. Like, perhaps it was an accident. But there's also, quote,
Hitting somebody with your car or something like that,
in
you know.
which someone killed someone else on purpose, but it was in a crazy circumstance that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their life. For example, if someone is attacked on the street and defending themselves, they kill the attacker. Killing is also legal in war.
Self-defense.
Sure,
yeah.
we've made laws to limit violence on civilians or folks who are not soldiers in the armed services, but otherwise...
I wanted to meet interesting and stimulating people of an ancient culture and kill them. I wanted to be the first kid on my block to get a confirmed kill.
Even in war, nearly all of us have to be trained to kill. It's not something most of us are comfortable doing, even if our own life might be immediately in danger. Today, we are both horrified by and fascinated by serial killers, or...
Really is true. Like, have you noticed how, and especially in recent, I don't know, couple years or so, like murder mysteries, stuff like that, like coverage of that, it's so popular on YouTube, like these type of videos and convictions and trials and stuff of murder. There is a sick fascination that we have that's probably just ingrained into our psyche as humans.
Killers who murder 3 or more people. We fear terrorists and mass shooters. We wonder, how could these people do such evil acts? And yet, throughout history, there have been humans directly responsible for the killing of not just one person or even a few people, but millions of people. When we think about world leaders who have killed the most people, 3 often immediately come to mind. Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Nazi Germany from 1933 until his death in 1945. Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union from 1922 until his death in 1953. And Mao Zedong, the dictator of China from 1949 until his death in 1976.
No Genghis Khan? Because as a percentage of population of the places they conquered, I think he's higher than all of those guys. And his were very, very deliberate. I know in this there's going to be discussions about deaths either directly or indirectly attributed to these leaders. But then you have like Genghis, who ordered that stuff.
Indeed, there are strong arguments that they are the worst 3 mass murderers in human history. That said, it's more complicated than statistics.
The ghost of Genghis
the numbers don't tell the whole story. The 3 were not equally ruthless. For example, Adolf Hitler is, in my opinion, the most ruthless of the 3.
Probably, I'm assuming he's probably going to go to, again, more like direct operations, you know, like the Holocaust, right? Like direct policy that he saw and help enact, right, with the final solution.
The way Hitler orchestrated genocide, or the deliberate and systematic destruction of a group, is well documented and arguably the most blatant. His most infamous genocide was the Holocaust, which was the murder of around 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe during World War II. It's estimated that over just one 3-month period during the war, Hitler oversaw the killing of more than 1.3 million Jews. Hitler also oversaw the killing of more than 1.5 million Romani people. He oversaw the killing of people with disabilities, homosexuals, Poles, Russians, Jehovah's Witnesses, and those sympathetic to socialism and communism. The vast majority of the people killed under Hitler's watch were civilians, and they were killed quickly. Now, not combatants of warfare. When you add that, then you're going to get a whole bunch more, because then you would be adding like the Russian casualties or the Soviet casualties. Are going to make that distinction where 20 million Soviets died in World War II. So attributed to different things. But yeah, if you added casualties from warfare, woo, boy, is that number going to be a whole lot higher. We will never know the exact number of people.
By the way, you can look at success rates of the Holocaust from the Nazi point of view. When you look at population decreases of Jewish populations, a lot of those Eastern European countries like Poland or Czechoslovakia had, like 90% population decreases. What is this? Something like a third of all Jews, really, like world Jews, died in the Holocaust there. But again, where the Germans actually like conducted their warfare, that number is way, way, way higher. Again, look, you can see population decreases of like 90%.
People killed by these dictators. Historians can only estimate based on the limited records they have. Based on that, Hitler was responsible for the deaths of between 16 and 20 million people.
You're adding warfare. I think that's what Mr. Beat meant too by that, right? Warfare, not just the Holocaust. Holocaust numbers are lower than that.
In my opinion, Joseph Stalin was almost as ruthless as Hitler. However, not nearly as many people killed under Stalin's rule were explicitly murdered. According to the historian Stephen Wheatcroft, Stalin oversaw around 1 million straight-up murders, but the vast majority of deaths under his rule were due to neglect.
Right. So, and the intentional stuff, especially under the Great Purge, so you're going to see that in his consolidation of power in the 1930s, where it's a lot more deliberate, where you saw things like half of the military leadership of the Soviet Union being purged under his leadership due to his, paranoia and stuff like that. And again, just people that he saw was enemies to what he believed was the Soviet socialism that he was trying to advocate for. Right. So he used that as a banner for that. So both, again, enemies of the state and enemies of him personally there. So, but you're going to see with him, he's going to be talking about here, I'm guessing, a lot of the policies, especially for the collectivization of agriculture, where many people starved to death, something like the Holodomor in the Ukraine. So let's see where he goes.
Some estimate that as many as 12 million people died in Stalin's Gulag, or system of labor camps set up throughout the Soviet Union. These camps were hell on earth, where people literally were worked to death. In 1942, nearly 1 out of every 4 prisoners died in one of these camps.
It's like the concentration camps in Nazi Germany.
Andrew Wyszynski once wrote about the conditions, quote, "Among the prisoners there are some so ragged and lice-ridden that they pose a sanitary danger to the rest. These prisoners have deteriorated to the point of losing any resemblance to human beings. Lacking food, they collect trash and, according to some prisoners, eat rats and dogs." And
a lot of those in Siberia, by the way. Camps like that, like out in Siberia, Stalin had been in those multiple times. I believe he was imprisoned in basically these camps, like in these prison camps, like 6 times, I think. Wasn't it something like that? Correct me if I'm wrong on the number. And he kept finding ways to get out or escape. Like he's actually been in camps like this back in Russia, Tsarist Russia. So, and then they're going to be probably even worse under his rule, you know, but can't ignore the pogroms that took place before the Russian Revolution.
In the Great Purge of 1937 alone, Stalin was responsible for the deaths of up to 1.2 million people as he hunted down anyone who still might be sympathetic to his old political rival, Leon Trotsky. As many as 7 million more people died due to a famine caused by Stalin's collective farming policies in the early 1930s.
By the way, I've asked this question maybe before, but what do you guys think of what things would have been like if Trotsky actually was the one in power versus Stalin? You know, when Lenin dies, and that's another question too. If Lenin, I hear a lot of people talk about if Lenin had lived longer without those health issues, was he years away from being as brutal? Like I've heard people say that he would, you know, it's just possible to like probably confirm, but like he would have been as bad as a Stalin or something like that. What do you think Trotsky would have been like as a leader if it came to types of oppression that could lead to death, like what happened in Stalin's year? What do you guys think about that? Put down below.
Many were Ukrainians. Today, historians call it the Holodomor, or terror famine, which emphasizes how this was a human-created problem that Stalin's policies caused. Another up to 1.5...
I'll have to link to this video in the recommended videos tile that comes at the end of the video. A good video I reacted to not too long ago. I was doing a lot of Russia-Ukraine history videos when that war first broke out. One on the Holodomor, where I learned a lot more about it, and some of like the weird experimentations they were doing with I forgot the guy's name, but there was a guy that was like going to be head of agriculture, of these like experimental ways of doing agriculture that ended up being awful and killing obviously a lot of people. So you saw stuff like that happen, even just like scientific failures that lead to death when it comes to agriculture.
5 million unnecessarily died in another Soviet famine that Stalin could not only have prevented, but also could have ended. And of course, there were the judicial executions and straight-up massacres of Stalin's political opponents. Altogether, Stalin was responsible for the deaths of between an estimated 40 and 60 million people. If the 60 million figure is accurate, that would mean he was responsible for an average of 2 million deaths each year of his reign.
You just have to, again, decide what you're going to define as, he being responsible. Is it more how indirectly is it of direct orders, right, for the death of people? And he did a good job distinguishing that too, of some of the direct or indirect policies here. You'll see one thing with all of these guys is killing of political opponents. Right. Hitler did that same thing. He had like Night of the Long Knives, and just the purging of his own party happened a lot. But Stalin to a much bigger extent, he purged his own military. All right, Mao Zedong
was responsible for more deaths than any other person in history. That said, Mao Zedong was probably the
Cultural Revolution.
ruthless of the three, in my opinion. He was still pretty freaking ruthless.
A lot of policy deaths for him.
He was responsible for systematically killing between 4 and 6 million people through China's so-called justice system and, quote, reform through labor camps.
This is where also Mao was very different in the fact that, like when a lot of this collectivization and collectivized economies were created with the Soviet Union versus China, the Soviet Union really focused a lot of on industrialization. I mean, that's where their revolution came from, was really the urban working class. Although obviously the peasant class in Tsarist Russia was horribly oppressed. But China kind of did their own thing and still like found a foundation in agrarian lifestyles, as has been a major part of Chinese history forever. In fact, most of their revolutions, when you look at the many revolutions that have overthrown dynasties in Chinese history, came from the peasant class. Happened a bunch of times, and some more successful than others. I mean, you had something like the Taiping Rebellion in the 19th century, which went, what was that, 20 million dead, or whatever, 20 to 30 million die there, and it got stopped by the Qing dynasty. But then, yeah, you're going to get famines here. You're going to get the political opponent deaths, but millions upon millions of famine deaths that will actually dwarf even Joseph Stalin, who those policies under their government led to obviously a lot of deaths, but it's going to be dwarfed here.
As many as 25 million died in these camps during Mao's reign. Most killed
in very
were
short time periods too.
Counter-revolutionaries. Some were sent simply because of their religion. Most of the deaths he and his regime caused were by accident. His Great Leap Forward campaign in the late 1950s and early 1960s
worst famine in history,
was
probably
a complete and total disaster, especially the, you guessed it, collective farming policies. Probably at least 30 million people died from starving to death in what became known as the Great Chinese Famine.
And this is only over, wasn't that famine really, that specifically those ones, I think only about 3 years, from what I think 59 to 60. So they basically, the whole issue of this transition that communist China was making was turning over basically aristocratic landowners, the land back to the people. Although it's going to be collectivized, those peasants aren't going to be able to own that land. It's going to be collectivized. You're going to work on communes, and it ended up backfiring a lot. There's another problem to insert in here too. China did not have a lot of the money to industrialize when they wanted to do like machinery and stuff like that. So they actually ended up selling a lot of grain that they were producing there to places like the Soviet Union for in turn for help with paying for industrialization and stuff like that. And when you divert food away from the people, I mean, you see what happens there. So it's a lot of that, again, food was collectivized and then distributed actually away from those farmers, leading to that death because of the financial situation for them trying to start their own industrial revolution, because they were very late to it. They did a lot of, in that time period too, a lot of trying to get people to industrialize on their own. People made refineries and like try to make steel mills in their backyard, which was so low quality, very, very dangerous, and had no value on the international market either, even if they wanted to sell, because it was at such low quality as compared to industrialization, metallurgy, and the rest of the world. China had a very hard time making this transition into this society that they were trying to create.
Yep, the Great Leap Forward was quite the leap backward, causing the deadliest famine in history.
Pun, I guess,
However,
before,
it's
for how
not
horrific
easy
it
to
is.
place all the blame on Mao himself. A lot of other trends probably also contributed to the disaster. And finally, there was the violence and chaos caused by Mao's Cultural Revolution. It's possible that nearly 20 million people died during it. Altogether, Mao was responsible for the deaths of between 60 and 80 million people.
And with the Cultural Revolution, a lot more of political opponents than, say, the death coming from the famine. A lot more targeted. You know, after the Great Leap Forward there in the famine that was created there in the early 60s, as you can imagine, a lot of spirit and excitement for Chinese communism died a little bit with it. And people, I guess you would say, would lose faith in it, as you could understand. Also at this time, when you're talking about the late 60s, you're talking about generation 2 of Chinese communism. And Mao was very concerned that the second generation here was not going to have the revolutionary spirit that their parents did. Because he's like, you know, your parents, and Mao himself as a leader during the Civil War and the revolution, felt those were like the glory years, right? And that this next generation wasn't going to experience that because of, again, all the devastation. He wanted to make sure and try to really make people and really direct things at young people to be more excited. That's where you're going to get a lot of, I guess you'd call indoctrination in a lot of way, where they were taught when you have like teachings and mandatory education on the philosophies of Mao. You see those in the mandatorily distributed Little Red Book. You'll see those a lot. It's a little book that the new kind of like communist youth of China would read, and also to try to purge anything that looks like people or something that might be trending in the direction of becoming a new class of bourgeoisie. So anybody that's with maybe capital, what might look like capitalist intentions. One of the groups, and this hits home to me here, that was targeted, and all that was higher education people. A lot of teachers and stuff were, yanked out of the schools and stuff like that. They felt they may be corrupting the youth or something, and were trying to separate themselves from common Chinese society. And actually, one of the common things was to load up educators like that. They basically put them in trucks and stuff, send them out to the field so they can get a taste of what real China is.
Incredibly, millions still view Mao today as a hero, as someone who liberated China from Imperial Japan and imperialism in general, as someone who helped advance women's rights, basic health care, education, and literacy, and as someone who helped modernize China into a leading world power. But
the communists all during that time period from China to Vietnam put a lot of marketing into what they believe was their very progressive views for women. Part of that policy for almost basically every communist revolution was equality for men and women. So men and women getting the right to vote. In a lot of countries where that wasn't happening, and educational opportunities for women was one of the things that they marketed and used as a point of pride in comparing their societies with like capitalist societies.
But 80 million people? Come on, man. Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler, just the three of them, have possibly been directly responsible for the deaths of up to 160 million people.
Gosh,
to put that in perspective, all of Russia
20th
currently
century
has around
sucks.
146 million people. So 3 people causing the deaths of 160 million people. It's really difficult to wrap your head around those numbers.
I hope you all that were watching this understood too how the deaths of these are attributed differently to each person. They're not all from the same types of procedures and stuff. They all had different reasons for those killings. I don't know if reasons is the right word, but different things that can be attributed to why that happens, between deliberate killings, ignorant policies, whatever it is, failed experimentation, whatever you want to call, political oppression.
There's this quote often attributed to Joseph Stalin. Quote, "If only one man dies of hunger, that is a tragedy. If millions die, that's only statistics." Indeed,
I heard that quote. I didn't know that was attributed to him.
Processing big numbers, and only looking at numbers can blind us to the tragedy
It's true.
of each death.
It's totally true.
When each number represents a human life, we ought to think about every person in our own life who we love.
This is actually the exact point I bring a lot when in my lessons and stuff, especially when we're talking about something like World War I or World War II, when we look at statistics of how big those numbers, they can be very, very numbing. And it's hard as an educator and even a person learning to try to connect with those numbers. And I try to use this analogy he's using right here, which is, this is a person. This is your family, right? This is your child, your mother. You have to start looking at that. Those people are no different than you are. Try to create some humanity in this discussion.
You love at least one other person. You probably love several people, actually. And if one of them died, it would be devastating to you. So now multiply that by 130 million. Still can't wrap your head around it, can you?
Jeez.
The bottom line is we must do whatever we can to make sure people like Mao, Stalin, and Hitler never come to power again.
All right, final thoughts. All right, so basic overview from Mr. Beat there of looking at that. There's obviously so many more details to go in about the cause of these deaths. As I noted many, many times. And I think that's going to be important if you really want to like talk about these guys in relations to death attributed to them. It's going to be really important that you study all of them specifically and see exactly how these deaths occurred, because there's a lot of different ways. I don't want to rehash them all right now. So if you ever hear debates about that, about especially because it's usually around like who was worse. I get that question a lot from, you know, like teenagers and stuff, because teenagers think very black and white. So it's like, who was worse, where you put these valuations on those terms. And it's like, I know you want like an easy answer, but what you have to do is break down all of these different things. And then you can make a more maybe informed opinion of whatever you mean is, you know, which person is worse. Right. And how do you attribute that? Do you attribute it all the same, whether it was deliberate killings versus bad policies, whether those are you know, how directly tied to these, and then comparing the conditions before from which they came from as well, understanding the historical context before all of these guys rose. What was death and destruction like before these guys came to power as compared to when they did come into power? There's a lot of things that go into that. So overall, how do you all take this? Who, if however you want to define it, who is responsible for more deaths between these guys? What do you think? Let me know down below. And again, kind of try to describe what you attribute to mean as they killed them. Okay. Anyways, with that, again, thanks to Mr. Beat for, again, supporting my channel. He's been great with that. Go ahead and make sure you support the link down below. He makes tons of videos every week. And with that, we'll see you all next time. Bye.